Hi, as we learn more and more about GIS, we'll learn about the difference between attribute queries and spatial queries. This is a quick tutorial on spatial queries using some information from North Carolina. I'm working here with ArcGIS Pro, and as I migrate my tutorials from ArcMap to ArcGIS Pro, there'll be a fairly steep learning curve, but I think we'll get through this together. Now, what you see here in ArcGIS Pro is we've got the tabs right here, or ribbons up at the top. But in the left, and I'm going to focus on this, we have our table of contents. And I have a few different data layers here. I've got a topographic map that I can turn on and off. I have zip code data, and I have a number of different data layers and a number of different attributes in here that we'll explore really quickly because we're going to run an attribute query. I have some major cities, I have counties, and I have census tracts. And in this case, we're looking at food deserts in this case here. So what we're going to do is we're going to run a attribute query, and typically attribute queries ask questions about the tabular information attached to the data. And this tabular information is stored in what we call an attribute table. So if I right mouse click on the zip code data and click on Open Attribute Table, you can see there's 763 individual zip codes throughout the state, and I have all this different information selected about it. I've been putting together, as of this recording, I've been putting together demographics, socioeconomic information, and trying to relate it to COVID rates in addition to voting patterns and things like that. But I don't want to focus too much on that because, as you can see here, none of these attributes have information such as distance from the nearest county or what type of county it's located in. So we can run this with other features here as well. So we're going to run a couple of simple attribute queries here, and then we'll get a little bit more complex. But what I want to do here is, first of all, I'm going to click on Fields View because I don't want to show all of these individual fields. So I'm just going to show a few of these fields here. So I've got total population. I'll go down to the bottom and work my way up. I have COVID rates as of 4/17/2021. I have spending on fruits and vegetables. I have a median household income, poverty rates, and let me just find out a couple other ones here because this makes it a little bit easier to manage. And is this in a USDA food desert? Yes or no? And that's about it. And so up here, I'm going to click Save because I'm in uh, looking at these new fields. And then X out of this. So now it makes it a little bit more manageable here. So I can see COVID, spending on fruits and vegetables, is it a USDA food desert, median household income, and the total population. So I'm just going to run some very, very basic queries on these. And so I'll X out of this. Now I'm going to click on Select by Attributes, and I'm going to create a brand new query. So this is my zip code voting data. I'm going to create a new selection. And so what I'm going to look for is COVID rates. And I can click on COVID rates are greater than, and a high value here is about 600 here. So I'll look for some of the higher COVID rates. Now I have two ways of doing it. With ArcGIS Pro, we can do using these drop downs so that we have fields, operators, and values. And with any attribute query, we have a field, an operator, and a value. So COVID rate. In addition, I can generate an SQL query like we have in the past, or you might be familiar with programming languages. COVID rate is greater than 600. So this is the SQL structured query language statement. This is it creating the query generator. I'm going to click Apply. I'll click Apply right here. Okay. And now you can see here. Now if I right mouse click, Open Attribute Table, you can see 616 out of the 763 have a COVID rate above 600. And I can clear this. Select by attributes. I can do another new selection. Let me find where the COVID rates are greater than 2,000. This is extremely high. And now we'll see this work together hand in hand. So I'm going to click Apply. So now you can see 4 out of 63. And I have a couple here, so I can clear them here. or this bottom down here that shows show selected, these have all of the zip codes here that have been highlighted that have a COVID rate of greater than 2,000. 2,000 extremely high. Now I can get more and more complex here. So instead of 2,000, I'll get another one here. I'm going to type in 1,000, apply. So now we can see there's 181 of these that are greater than 763. Now I want to add a clause. Okay? And as part of adding this clause, well, like we said before, we have a field, an operator, and a value. But we have and. So we have and or. And means it needs to satisfy both of these. So now we're looking for zip codes that have COVID rates greater than 1,000 and household income, median household income less than 30,000. So we're looking at this particular column here and this particular column here. And you can see what this looks like in SQL. And I'm going to click apply. And so before we run this, we talk about the difference between logical errors and syntax errors. In this case, it's hard to make a syntax error since we're not programming in SQL, but you can see that there's 181 of these here. If we're running these a little bit more restrictive, there will be definitely less than 181. So I'm going to click apply. And so now you can see these are 16. So really high COVID rates and really low income in these cases here. And we can look at the spatial distribution of these as well. Next thing I'm going to look for areas that have COVID rates between 1,000 and 1,500. And so now I'm going to get rid of this one. So COVID rate is greater than 1,000. COVID rate is less than 1,500. I'm going to click apply right here. So now when we look at this particular column, these are all the COVID rates that are between 1,000 and 1,500. And so make sure we know the difference because as I stress in this class, we're going to talk about the difference between logical errors and syntax errors. If I change this and to an or, it's going to change everything and click apply. Now you'll see there's 752, all of them, literally all of those. I got a couple of these that have no values because data wasn't imported in for this particular date. But make sure you know the difference between an and an or. I'm going to click apply. So now we can look at all the COVID rates and we can look at the spatial distribution of these. So what we've talked about here is running attribute queries. And now I'm going to click go. Okay. Now the last thing we're going to look at is we're going to select attribute queries. Now instead of new selection, what we're going to do is add to current selection, remove from current selection, select subset from current location, or switch the current selection. So I can select from current selection. So I went through the trouble of creating everything that finding every COVID rate between 1,000 and 1,500, but now I need to go back and do something. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick from just these 173. And now what I'm going to look for is, are they in a USDA food desert? So USDA food desert, I have no or yes. And so now I'm going to find everything from these 173 where the USDA food desert is equal to yes. I click apply. And now you can see these are 28. And so I have an attribute here that says USDA food desert, yes. And so what we've looked at in this particular talk is how to generate queries, how to look at the difference between attribute strings that are attributes here, as in yes and no, and then other cases where they're numbers. Because you notice right here, I don't have a greater than or less than. Okay, it doesn't give me greater than or less than because these data are string. The only possible values are yes and no. And so we're starting to look at the difference between these logical errors and the syntax errors, as well as the different types of selection types. So before we run these, you should have a good idea as to the type of output you're going to get. You're typically not going to get nothing or everything, and so you have a good idea as to what's going to be your result when you're finished.